Hello and welcome to Science Minds. I'm your host, Olivia Surgent, and today we're in the Purple Tree Cafe at the UC Davis Mind Institute, and we're joined by Dr. Matthew Lerner from Drexel University. Dr. Lerner, welcome to Science Minds.
Thank you, Olivia. Happy to be here.
So excited to have you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as we get started, for you to just tell us a little bit more about the kind of work that you do, the types of questions that you like to ask, and then maybe the ways that you go about answering them.
Well, so we're interested in understanding this phenomenon of social connection, right? Our lab is called the Social Connections and Treatment Lab, and we kind of want to understand what that means in all of the different ways possible. So we try to look at what does social connection and social success mean to any given person. We use existing measures, questionnaire measures, behavioral measures. We use more qualitative approaches. We use brain-based approaches like electrophysiology to try to understand all the the different ways that the sense of social connection and success can come about, and use that to try to maybe ask questions and question the assumptions about how that happens. We then try to use that information to come up with improved interventions and ways to help to create a more inclusive and accessible world. And then we try to listen to the feedback from folks across the community and kind of use community feedback and input to sort of guide what we are doing and what we need to do better.
It really struck me when you were telling us about your work, this idea of how do we define these constructs, right? Like, it seems kind of nebulous, right? We all are looking to make friends, right? We're all looking to engage in kind of these social interactions, but how do we define what is meaningful about those things and kind of look at that from a scientific perspective? I
think we often start with the existing tools that we have, right? I think as scientists we have to be grounded in a literature, right? So we have questionnaires, and we have observational approaches, and we have peer-nominated approaches, asking different peers, who's your friend, and these are sort of sometimes considered gold standard approaches in the field. But then I think in our lab one thing we like to think a lot about is questioning assumptions. Why have we assumed that these things are gold standard, and how can we do better? And so then often what we think about doing is, can we look at those same measures a different way? We care a lot about, for instance, informants and context, right? So social stuff is context dependent. I'm interacting with you very differently than I interacted with the lovely folks who have been ushering me about throughout the day than I do with my partner and kids at home, than I do with my friends and colleagues at work, and then I do relative to folks that I went to college with. And so if you asked each of them to rate me socially, all of those perspectives have value. No one is right and the other one's just being less right in some way. And so we think a lot about how do we leverage that? How do we think about, what are we getting in the space between perspectives? Because I think that that's often where we live socially, is in the space between each other, but also in the space between our different measurement approaches. And we try to quantify that. I mean, not just I'm talking very abstractly right now, but we have tools and approaches actually for turning that into usable, meaningful data that we can look at carefully. We then also try to index that as best as possible to the kinds of outcomes that folks would, on the one hand, think of as more objective, like neural metrics. But I think our goal in doing that is, rather than trying to say, well, that's a true thing, we just say, well, that is reliable in a certain way and can tell us a little bit about how these things come about for somebody. And then we also try to anchor them into things that folks, I think, see as much more radically subjective, which is the lived experiences of folks when we talk to them, include them at different levels of research, as partners, as co-researchers, sometimes as participants, and hear what they say. Because honestly, at the end of the day, all the things I just said all sound good, but if a bunch of autistic folks hear me talk about that and go, yeah, but I think you're just wrong. I think you're just missing something really important. That probably matters most of all.
Definitely. Have you had people come up to you and say, this is just wrong, you need to pivot? Or have you had any experiences perhaps as you were evolving this perspective on research that kind of caused you to shift the way you're looking at it?
I feel very fortunate that I have some wonderful neurodivergent partners and colleagues and friends over the years. And so I have a good number of folks who are willing to call me out. And actually one of my many favorite things about working with a lot of neurodivergent partners is there's much more of there's much less of a willingness to be constrained by the social norms around that, and folks are really willing to say to me, no, Matt, I think you got this wrong. Mm-hmm. And so actually I have a lot of experiences like that, where we'll think about, for example, what are meaningful social goals, or what's a meaningful therapy goal? I think is a one that's come up in some of our intervention research, and one of my wonderful colleagues in my lab, Dina Gassner, is a senior research scientist. She is amazing at really getting us to question our assumptions in this work. Great example that comes to mind is we'll often be giving talks or doing trainings about, let's say, addressing anxiety. And, as a, say, CBT trained person, or for trained people at CBT, we might focus on, okay, well, this person is scared of birthday candles, and they don't want to go to birthdays. And we think about how do we, in an inclusive and thoughtful way, give them opportunities to connect or to go to those things, or we might use a kind of progressive approach to do an exposure so that they can be more okay with and around birthday candles, and eventually you say that can be really successful, and then they can go to birthdays. And one of the things that Dina has said in a number of different contexts actually together, that often always stops me with my tracks, is, yeah, but do they need to go to that particular birthday? Do they want to? Whose problem is it that they can't go to that particular birthday? And sometimes the answer is it's a problem because they want to go there. But in many cases, maybe it's their parents think they should, and depending on the age and the person's needs and goals, maybe that's not where they need to focus on yet, or maybe there are other things that are more important priorities. And really letting us listen to those priorities, I think, is certainly helps to keep me humble and not take too seriously my own beliefs. But I think also helps us question, what are we really trying to do when we're trying to help make better lives for people.
I love that. Yeah, connecting it back to that kind of listening to the community, right, and letting that drive your directions, right, and kind of your goals. I am curious if there are instances where listening to the community and their specific needs has perhaps influenced the ways that you approach interventions. It sounds like you have some very creative ways of kind of looking at intervention and thinking about it.
Yeah, I think it has really from the start, particularly for social stuff. I mean, actually, in a way, that's how I got started in the field. Is a lot of our work has been on social intervention, and before I was in the field at all, I had experiences working in summer camps and other programs for kids and teens on the spectrum, and those interventions were very much focused on teaching kids sort of the right thing to do in given social context, social rules, summer camps, summer programs. And I remember being, in my 20s and being like, I don't know much about autism or much about this field, but sure, these experts are saying that this is what we're going to do at the summer camp. And I was delivering some of these programs, and suffice to say, I got very consistent feedback from that community that they didn't love what we were doing. I was often told and yelled at, don't tell us what to do. This is, I don't want to spend my summer hearing a bunch of rules. I want to play. I want to have fun. And at one point I had somebody, I remember ducking behind a desk as somebody, picked up a chair and threw it at me and said, stop telling me what to do. And I remember sitting there thinking, I feel like even if this in theory works, nobody's learning very much in this particular environment. And importantly, that was feedback from the community, right? That was a bunch of people saying, this is not what we're looking for. And so I was fortunate after that, it's a longer story, but the sort of short version, to have the opportunity to sort of build a new kind of program. And the very first thing we did for that program, before we did anything else, before we talked about the goals, the structure, the setting, anything, as I sat down with one in particular, but actually several young folks on the spectrum who I knew, and I said, hey, if we were going to make a camp, a summer camp that you would want, that would be something you'd want to do, what should it be about? And the answer I was given was pizza and video games. And I was back at the house I grew up in, and I found my notebook where I'd written this down. I wrote pizza and video games and circled it, and I was like, that's it. We have to start there. And everything that we need to do, we cannot lose that for this group and these people, this time, this is what they want to make sure is part of it. And not just as a reward, not just as oh, you did a good job, now you get to do this, but built right into what we're doing. And then the other part was, hearing that, they didn't want to be taught social rules. They wanted to instead be supported and facilitated in developing their own ways of being socially. And so the model that we built was built around pizza and video games and helping folks to kind of find their own ways and approaches to be socially successful on their own terms. So we use techniques of things like, improvisation, games and activities, to do that, because the nice thing about improv is that there's no right way, right? If I set up a game and you say we're on Mars, well, suddenly we're on Mars, and you say, and I say, well, now we're jousting. Well, we're jousting, and it's great because it allows folks to bring their own creativity to the table, and also build up their own social connections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That sounds wonderful. Who wouldn't want to participate in something where you get to play and think about pizza and video games, and who knows? I guess kind of taking that creative approach to intervention and kind of patient, person-centered focus and bringing it back to the science side of things, I'm wondering if you see any kind of trends in the autistic population or any other neurodivergent populations that are particularly different or maybe even similar to non-autistic populations in terms of these aspects of social development or social motivation drivers, things like that.
I mean, getting to do what you enjoy is something people generally enjoy. It's almost a tautology, right? I think that that certainly is similar. And of course, I think we shouldn't lose track of the fact that, no neurodivergent folks in general are not aliens, right? We are all people who, want to feel like we have a place in this world and want to have a place where we feel welcome and connected, right? That's a fundamental human need, and I would argue cuts across every population, even regardless of, level of expressed cognitive ability and language. Like the more we learn, even those assumptions turn out to the assumption that, even if you can't tell me you don't want to connect, it turns out that's not false. Everybody wants to have a place in the world. I think that maybe the distinction has to do with contexts that are maybe not well matched to those needs for a given person. So if somebody, let's say, struggles to keep up with the pace of the intensity of, moving around in a, crowded lunchroom, right? That will impede those social opportunities and make it harder to pick them up when they happen. If the sort of unstructured space of just walking around throughout the day, is not well matched, it can be more difficult. And so I think the way I think about differences is can we create almost like rarefied spaces for growth? These kind of special settings where folks can learn and practice their own social goals without judgment, without fear of judgment, and with a sense of value and validation, then that's where that development can happen for somebody who might otherwise miss it or might otherwise struggle in those settings. The analogy I often give is kind of like flexing a social emotional muscle, and the idea that for some folks that muscle just might be underdeveloped because of individual baseline differences. It might be because of lack of opportunities. So we can create sort of isometrics, right? Spaces where a person can focus and build up that one particular skill. Importantly, so that they are then empowered to make their own choices about it. And I think that is perhaps another key distinction is the goal for us, I think at least in my lab and my team, is not to look neurotypical, right? It's not to have social interactions that are even indistinguishable from non-autistic folks. And that creates some measurement problems, but there it is. The goal is to give people the capacity to choose and make an informed choice about when and how they're going to use given, let's say, social emotional skills.
I love that. That sounds like a wonderful goal. And it sounds like you're making great strides towards it. But
we're doing our best. I mean, look, it's also, nothing is kumbaya, nothing is, is utopian. And I think, one of the reasons I did leave the program that I ran was in part to do a better job of, and go into research, was to do a better job of measurement, but also, because I didn't have the hubris to think that this kind of wild idea was going to be right for everybody, right? There were people, you said, well, who doesn't want to do that? The answer was some people. And I think giving folks the opportunity, first of all, to say no is very important, but also thinking about, well, what is missing for those folks? Because I do think there is a space for everyone. The question is, how can we tailor what we're doing to make it accessible?
Yeah, how can we make that space?
Yeah.
To kind of wrap things up, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm wondering if you have like a tip or a final thought that you can leave us with to help us all go out into the community and foster some of this engagement. Like, is there anything we can do, any small changes we can make to help promote this?
Yeah. I think that we can all do a better job of both listening and realizing that everyone has something to say, and everyone has something of value to say, and not make assumptions about what saying that means. In several of our programs now, for instance, we're working with folks with a range of both language and sort of expressed cognitive ability, right? And looking to them as sometimes as advisors, actually, and leaders of some of our projects. And in those settings, someone is not likely to say to us, I'm sorry, I've produced for you a list of my concerns, and here are things that need to be better. And they're not even going to say, hey, don't tell me what to do, right? But in those settings, somebody might leave or might stay for only part of something, and that might be all that that they have, or might give us a moment of joy expressed through stimming or flapping, things that that might be how they're sharing their enthusiasm. And we should listen and take just as seriously that feedback as we do the feedback that I took from the person throwing the chair and saying, stop doing this, as we do from our community partners on our advisory boards, as we do from one another as scholars, as we do from our grant funders, as we do from our editors. Each and every person in these cases has something meaningful to say and share. And if we really want to make a more accessible world, where social belonging is real in the ways we want it to be, then everyone's got to matter.
Wow, well, I cannot imagine a better place to end it. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Lerner. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Olivia.
That's all we have for this episode of Science Minds. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.